Desert hidden strength. Loretta Hayes had spent years living a quiet life, keeping her head down and her past buried. But when Wade Coulter rode into town, dust-covered and full of unfinished business, she knew her piece was over. He leaned against her fence, his voice a slow drawl. "Didn't think I'd come back for you, did you, Loretta?" he murmured. "Reckon we got some talking to do." Chapter 1. The dust settles on redemption. The wind, a restless spirit, whipped through the skeletal branches of the cottonwood trees lining the dusty main street of Redemption, Arizona. It carried the scent of sun-baked earth, distant rain, and the faintest whisper of wood smoke from the hearths of the few, hardy souls who called this place home. Loretta Hayes watched it all from the porch of her small, weathered homestead, a mug of lukewarm coffee warming her hands. Her hands, once delicate, were now calloused and strong, marked by years of toil and the relentless Arizona sun. They were hands that had learned to wring life from the unforgiving land, hands that had buried secrets deeper than any well. Loretta was a woman built of resilience, her 58 years etched not in wrinkles, but in the quiet strength of her posture, the steady gaze of her faded blue eyes. Her hair, once the color of ripe wheat, was now streaked with silver, usually pulled back in a practical braid that did little to soften the severity of her features. She wore a simple, faded calico dress, covered by a worn leather apron, the uniform of a woman who had long ago traded dreams for duty. The rhythmic clang of the blacksmith's hammer down the street was a familiar comfort, a counterpoint to the unsettling quiet that had settled over Redemption in the past few weeks. Sheriff Brody, a man more interested in lining his pockets than upholding the law, had been run out of town by a posse of ranchers tired of his corruption. The new sheriff, a young, untested man named Thompson, was still finding his footing, leaving a palpable tension in the air, a sense of waiting for the other shoe to drop. Loretta took a slow sip of her coffee, the bitter taste a familiar anchor in a world that felt increasingly unsteady. She'd come to Redemption 15 years ago, seeking refuge from a past she couldn't outrun, a past filled with reckless choices and devastating consequences. She'd built a life here, a quiet, solitary existence centered around her small homestead and the meager living she scratched from the land. She raised chickens, tended a small vegetable garden, and occasionally sold her preserves at the town's general store. It wasn't much, but it was enough. It was safe. Or so she'd thought. The sound of approaching hooves, slow and deliberate, shattered the fragile peace. Loretta's hand tightened around her mug, her heart beginning a slow, heavy thud against her ribs. She knew that rhythm. It was the rhythm of dread, the rhythm of a past that refused to stay buried. She didn't need to look up to know who it was. She could feel his presence like a shift in the barometric pressure, a darkening of the sky before a storm. He stopped his horse at the edge of her property, the animal a magnificent chestnut mare, its coat gleaming in the afternoon sun. The rider dismounted with a fluid grace that belied his rugged appearance. He was tall, lean, and weathered, his face a tapestry of hard lines and sun-worn creases. His eyes, the color of a stormy sky, were fixed on her, unwavering and intense. Dust coated his worn leather chaps and the faded denim shirt stretched taut across his broad shoulders. A Colt Peacemaker rested low on his hip, its presence a silent testament to a life lived on the edge. Wade Coulter. The name echoed in her mind, a ghost resurrected from the ashes of her past. He hadn't aged as she had. Time had merely sharpened him, honed him into something harder, more dangerous. He leaned against the split-rail fence that separated her property from the road, his posture deceptively relaxed, his gaze anything but. "Didn't think I'd come back for you, did you, Loretta?" he murmured, his voice a low, gravelly drawl that sent a shiver down her spine. It was a voice she'd heard in her dreams, a voice that had once whispered promises and lies in equal measure. Loretta set her mug down on the porch railing, the ceramic clicking softly against the weathered wood. She straightened her shoulders, meeting his gaze head-on, refusing to show the fear that clawed at her insides. "I hoped you wouldn't," she replied, her voice surprisingly steady, betraying none of the turmoil within. He chuckled, a low, humorless sound that held no warmth. Hope's a fickle thing, Loretta. Especially out here. It tends to dry up and blow away like dust. He pushed himself off the fence, taking a slow, deliberate step towards her. Reckon we got some talking to do. The years melted away, and she was no longer the hardened homesteader, but the young, foolish woman who had fallen for his charm, his wildness, his promise of a life beyond the confines of her stifling upbringing. She remembered the feel of his calloused hands on her skin, the taste of his kisses, the reckless abandon that had consumed them both. She also remembered the betrayal, the pain, the crushing weight of his abandonment. There's nothing to talk about, Wade, she said, her voice tight with a mixture of anger and a pain she thought she'd long ago buried. You made your choices. I made mine. He stopped a few feet from the porch, his eyes searching her face, as if looking for something he'd lost, something he couldn't quite name. Choices have consequences, Loretta. And sometimes those consequences follow you, no matter how far you run. The air crackled with unspoken accusations, with the weight of shared history, with the ghosts of what might have been. The setting sun cast long shadows across the yard, painting the scene in hues of orange and purple, a stark backdrop to the confrontation that had been 15 years in the making. The wind picked up, swirling dust around them, a visual echo of the turmoil that raged within Loretta. She knew this wasn't just about the past. It was about something more, something that had brought him back to redemption, back to her. And whatever it was, she knew it spelled trouble. The quiet life she'd so carefully constructed was about to crumble, and she was standing right in the path of the falling debris. He was going to lay claim to whatever he wanted, and she knew it'd involve her. Chapter 2. Shadows of a Forgotten Promise. The silence stretched, taut and heavy, broken only by the creak of the porch swing and the distant, mournful howl of a coyote. Loretta watched Wade, her gaze unwavering, her mind racing. She saw the familiar lines of his face, the hard set of his jaw, the way his eyes seemed to hold both a challenge and a flicker of something she couldn't quite decipher. Regret, perhaps? Or something far more dangerous. What do you want, Wade? She finally asked, her voice low and steady, refusing to betray the tremor of fear that ran through her. She had to appear strong, even if she felt like a fragile leaf caught in a desert whirlwind. He took another step closer, his presence filling the space between them, the scent of leather and dust, and something indefinably him reaching her. It was a scent that brought back a flood of memories, both sweet and bitter, memories she'd tried so hard to suppress. I want what's mine, he said, his voice a low rumble that sent a shiver down her spine. What I was promised. Loretta's breath hitched. You were promised nothing, she retorted, her voice sharp with defiance. You left. You walked away without a backward glance. He flinched, almost imperceptibly, but Loretta saw it. A flicker of pain crossed his features, quickly masked by his usual stoic expression. Things weren't that simple, Loretta, he said, his voice rough. You know that. She did know that. But acknowledging it meant opening a door she'd kept firmly locked for 15 years, a door that led to a past filled with pain and betrayal. A past where she'd been young and naive, blinded by love and the allure of a life that had ultimately proven to be a mirage. Simple or not, it doesn't change the fact that you're here now, demanding something you have no right to, she said, her voice laced with bitterness. This is my life, Wade. I built it from nothing. You have no claim here. He leaned against one of the porch posts, his gaze sweeping over her small homestead, taking in the neatly tended garden, the coop where her chickens clucked softly, the weathered barn that stood sentinel against the encroaching desert. You built this on lies, Loretta, he said softly, his eyes locking with hers. On stolen land. The words hit her like a physical blow. Her breath caught in her throat, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. That's not true, she whispered, but the denial lacked conviction, even to her own ears. He raised an eyebrow, a sardonic smile playing on his lips. Isn't it? The Bar X Ranch was promised to me, Loretta. To my father, before me. It was in his will. A will you conveniently lost after he died. Loretta's father, Silas Hayes, had been a powerful rancher, a man who ruled his vast holdings with an iron fist. He'd also been a cruel and unforgiving man who had seen Loretta as nothing more than a pawn in his endless quest for more land and more power. He'd promised her to Wade's father, a neighboring rancher, in a deal that would have consolidated their empires. But Wade's father had died unexpectedly, and the deal had fallen apart. Silas had then arranged a marriage for Loretta to a wealthy banker in San Francisco, a man twice her age and utterly repulsive to her. She'd run, taking with her only a few belongings and a copy of her father's will, a will she'd altered, erasing the clause that gave the Bar X ranch to the Coulters. She'd known it was wrong, but she'd been desperate, terrified of the life her father had planned for her. She'd justified it to herself, telling herself that she deserved a chance at happiness, a chance to escape the suffocating control of her father. The will was unclear, she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. There were discrepancies. Wade laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that echoed in the gathering twilight. Discrepancies? You forged it, Loretta. You stole what was rightfully mine. I did what I had to do to survive, she said, her voice rising in defense. You wouldn't understand. You had choices. I had none. He stepped closer, his eyes blazing with a mixture of anger and something else, something that looked dangerously close to hurt. You think I had choices? I was a kid, Loretta. My father died. Our ranch was falling apart, and the woman I thought I loved, she disappeared into the night, taking everything with her. The raw pain in his voice was a knife to her heart. She'd never thought of it from his perspective, never considered the consequences of her actions on him. She'd been so focused on her own survival, her own escape, that she'd blinded herself to the damage she'd caused. I am sorry, Wade, she said, the words feeling inadequate, hollow. I never meant to hurt you. He stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. The wind whipped around them, carrying the scent of the approaching night, the scent of dust and secrets, and the ghosts of a forgotten promise. The shadows deepened, obscuring his features, making him look even more like the outlaw she'd once known, the outlaw she'd loved and betrayed. He looked like he was weighing something very important. Chapter 3. The weight of unspoken words. The apology hung in the air between them, fragile and insufficient, like a single drop of rain in the vast, parched desert. Wade didn't acknowledge it, didn't even seem to hear it. His gaze remained fixed on her, intense and unwavering, as if he were trying to see through her, to unravel the tangled threads of her past and his. Sorry doesn't change anything, Loretta, he finally said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. It doesn't bring back my father. It doesn't give me back the ranch that was stolen from me. Loretta flinched at the harshness of his words, but she couldn't deny their truth. She'd lived with the guilt of her actions for 15 years, a constant weight on her conscience, a shadow that darkened even the brightest days. She tried to make amends, to build a life of honesty and integrity, but the past had a way of catching up, of demanding its due. What do you want me to do, Wade? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. I can't change the past. I can't undo what I did. He took a deep breath, the air hissing between his teeth. You can give me back what's mine, he said, his voice low and firm. The Bar X. Loretta's heart sank. She'd known this was coming, had dreaded it from the moment he'd ridden up to her homestead. But hearing the words, spoken aloud, made the reality of it all the more devastating. This is all I have, Wade, she said, her voice trembling. It's not much, but it's my home. It's everything. He looked around at the small, weathered house, the meager garden, the few chickens scratching in the dirt. He saw the years of hard work, the quiet desperation, the fragile peace she'd carved out for herself. He saw the woman she'd become, a woman hardened by life, but still possessing a flicker of the spirit he'd once been drawn to. I know, he said, his voice softening slightly. And I'm not asking you to leave with nothing. Loretta looked at him, confusion clouding her eyes. What are you saying? He hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his features. This was the part he'd been dreading, the part that went against everything he believed, everything he'd planned. He'd come to redemption seeking justice, seeking revenge, but now, standing here in front of her, he found himself wavering. "I'm saying there might be another way," he said, his voice rough. "A way for us both to get what we want." Loretta frowned. "I don't understand." He took a step closer, his eyes holding hers. "Marry me, Loretta." The words hung in the air, shocking and unexpected, like a sudden clap of thunder in a clear sky. Loretta stared at him, speechless, her mind reeling. Marriage? To Wade? After all these years, after all the pain and betrayal? It was absurd, impossible. "You're crazy," she finally managed to say, her voice shaking. That's insane." He didn't flinch, didn't back down. "Is it? We both need something, Loretta. You need to keep your home. I need to reclaim my inheritance. Marriage would solve both problems." "It's a business arrangement, you mean," she said, her voice laced with bitterness. "A cold, calculated deal." "It doesn't have to be," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "It could be a new beginning. For both of us." Loretta looked at him, searching his face for any sign of deception, any hint of the ruthless outlaw he'd once been. But all she saw was a weariness, a vulnerability that mirrored her own. She saw a man who, like her, was haunted by the past, a man who was searching for a way to make peace with it, to find a measure of redemption. The idea was still preposterous, unthinkable. But as she looked at him, at the hard lines of his face softened by the fading light, at the flicker of hope in his stormy eyes, a tiny seed of possibility began to sprout in her heart. A seed of hope that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to heal the wounds of the past, to build a future together, a future that wasn't defined by betrayal and regret. But it was a fragile seed, easily crushed by the weight of unspoken words, by the ghosts of their shared history, and the harsh realities of the life they had both led. He was asking for more than just a signature on a marriage certificate. He was asking for a piece of her soul, the part she had guarded so fiercely for so long. She wondered if she could ever truly let her guard down around him, and what that would spell for her, for them, for redemption. Chapter 4. A bargain struck at twilight. The proposal hung between them, as heavy and palpable as the gathering dusk. Loretta stared at Wade, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Fear, anger, disbelief, and a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years, a hesitant, fragile hope. Could she truly consider this? Marry the man who had both broken her heart and haunted her dreams? "You can't be serious, Wade," she said, her voice a strained whisper, trying to grasp the enormity of his suggestion. We were barely more than children back then. It was a lifetime ago." He stepped closer, his presence a comforting yet unsettling weight in the fading light. "Time doesn't erase everything, Loretta. Some things, some debts, linger." She knew he was right. The years hadn't diminished the impact of their shared past, the tangled web of love, betrayal, and regret that still bound them together. And now, he was offering a solution, a twisted, unconventional path to redemption for both of them. "This is about the land, isn't it?" she asked, her voice laced with a weary resignation. "You want the Bar X back, and this is your way of getting it." He met her gaze, his eyes dark and unreadable in the twilight. "It's about more than that, Loretta. It's about setting things right. About a second chance." The words resonated with her, stirring a longing she'd long suppressed. A second chance. Could they truly find that after all the pain and mistrust? Could they build something new on the ruins of their shattered past? "And what about us, Wade?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "What about what we once had, or what we thought we had?" He reached out, his calloused hand gently touching her cheek, a gesture so unexpected, so tender, that it sent a shiver through her. "That's up to us, Loretta. We can let the past define us, or we can try to build something different. Something better." His touch was a spark, igniting a warmth she thought long extinguished. She saw a vulnerability in his eyes, a plea that mirrored her own hesitant desire for something more than the solitary existence she'd carved out for herself. But could she trust him? Could she trust herself to open her heart again, to risk the pain that inevitably came with love? "I need time to think, Wade," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. This is a lot to take in." He nodded, withdrawing his hand, the warmth fading from her cheek. "I understand. I'll give you until tomorrow morning. Meet me at the old oak tree by the creek, the one we used to meet at." The mention of their old meeting place brought a fresh wave of memories flooding back, memories of stolen kisses, whispered promises, and the reckless abandon of young love. It was a place steeped in their shared history, a place where they had once dreamed of a future together, a future that had never come to be. "And if I say no?" she asked, her voice tight with apprehension. His expression hardened, the vulnerability vanishing, replaced by the stoic mask of the outlaw he'd once been. "Then I'll take what's mine, Loretta. By any means necessary." The threat hung in the air, a stark reminder of the stakes involved. This wasn't just about a marriage of convenience, it was about power, control, and the reclaiming of a legacy. It was about survival. She nodded, her heart heavy with the weight of her decision. "Tomorrow morning, then," she said, her voice firm, despite the tremor in her hands. He turned to leave, his silhouette a dark outline against the fading light. He paused at the edge of the porch, his back to her. "Loretta," he said, his voice low and rough, "I never stopped caring for you." The words, unexpected and raw, sent a jolt of emotion through her. She watched him mount his horse and ride away, disappearing into the deepening shadows, leaving her alone with her thoughts, her doubts, and the faint, flickering hope that maybe, just maybe, this bargain struck at twilight could lead to something more than just a resolution to a long-standing feud. It could lead to a healing, a forgiveness, a second chance at a love she thought she'd lost forever. But the path ahead was fraught with peril, with the ghosts of their past and the uncertain future that lay before them, stretching out like the vast, unforgiving desert that surrounded them. She knew it was not just a matter of agreeing, but also of proving herself. Chapter 5. Echoes in the Desert Wind. The night was long and restless. Loretta tossed and turned in her narrow bed, the silence of the small homestead punctuated only by the creaking of the old house and the distant howls of coyotes. Sleep eluded her, her mind a maelstrom of conflicting thoughts and emotions. Wade's proposal, his unexpected confession, the threat that lay beneath his offer of a second chance, it all swirled within her, a chaotic dance of fear and hope. She rose before dawn, the sky still a deep indigo, the stars fading like distant memories. She dressed in her usual practical attire, but took extra care with her hair, braiding it neatly and securing it with a ribbon, a small act of defiance against the turmoil that raged within her. She made coffee, the strong, bitter brew a familiar comfort, and sat on the porch, watching the eastern sky slowly lighten, painting the desert in hues of pale pink and gold. The memories came unbidden, flooding her senses with the bittersweet ache of what might have been. She remembered Wade as a young man, full of laughter and reckless charm, his eyes sparkling with a wildness that had both captivated and terrified her. She remembered the feel of his arms around her, the taste of his kisses, the whispered promises they'd made under the vast, starlit sky. She remembered the pain of his betrayal, the crushing weight of his abandonment, the years she'd spent trying to rebuild her life, to bury the memory of him deep within her heart. But now, he was back, a changed man, harder, more guarded, yet with a flicker of vulnerability that hinted at the boy she'd once loved. He was offering her a way out, a chance to keep her home, to secure her future. But at what cost? Could she truly marry him, knowing the history between them, the pain, the mistrust? Could she open her heart to him again, risking another heartbreak, another betrayal? As the sun finally crested the horizon, casting long shadows across the desert, Loretta made her decision. She couldn't go back, couldn't undo the past. But maybe, just maybe, she could forge a new future, a future that wasn't defined by regret and resentment. Maybe this unlikely alliance could be a path to healing, to redemption, for both of them. She saddled her old mare, Bess, a sturdy, reliable animal that had been her companion for many years. The ride to the creek was familiar, the path well worn by time and memory. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of sagebrush and damp earth, the sounds of the awakening desert filling the silence. She found Wade waiting for her beneath the old oak tree, his back against the massive trunk, his gaze fixed on the flowing water of the creek. He looked up as she approached, his expression unreadable, his eyes searching her face. "You came," he said, his voice low, a hint of surprise in his tone. "I said I would," Loretta replied, dismounting and tying Bess to a nearby branch. She walked towards him, her steps slow and deliberate, her heart pounding in her chest. He straightened, his tall frame casting a shadow over her. "Have you thought about it?" "Yes," she said, meeting his gaze head-on.
"I have."
The silence stretched between them, taut with anticipation. The only sound was the gentle murmur of the creek, the rustling of leaves in the breeze, the distant call of a hawk circling overhead.
"And?"
he prompted, his voice a low rumble. Loretta took a deep breath, steeling herself for what she was about to say. "I'll marry you, Wade," she said, her voice firm and clear. "But on my terms." His eyebrows rose slightly, a flicker of surprise crossing his features. "Your terms?" "Yes," she said, her chin lifting in defiance. "This isn't just about the land, Wade. It's about us. And if we're going to do this, it has to be a partnership, not a takeover." He studied her for a long moment, his eyes searching her face, as if trying to gauge her sincerity, her resolve. She saw a flicker of respect in his gaze, a grudging admiration for her strength. "What are your terms, Loretta?" he asked, his voice softer now, devoid of the hard edge it had held the previous evening. She laid them out, clearly and concisely. She would retain ownership of her homestead, her independence, her right to make her own decisions. They would share the responsibilities of the ranch, working together as equals. And most importantly, there would be no pretense of love, no forced intimacy. This was a business arrangement, a partnership, nothing more. At least for now. Wade listened patiently, his expression unchanging. When she was finished, he nodded slowly. "Agreed," he said, his voice firm. "But I have one condition of my own." Loretta waited, her heart pounding in her chest. "We give it a real chance, Loretta," he said, his eyes holding hers. "We try to make this work, not just as partners but as husband and wife." The words hung in the air, a challenge and a promise. Loretta knew what he was asking, what he was hoping for. He wanted more than just a marriage of convenience. He wanted a chance to rekindle what they'd once had, to build a real relationship, a real future together. And as she looked into his eyes, she realized that a part of her, a small, hidden part, wanted the same thing. But the fear was still there, the fear of being hurt again, the fear of trusting him, of trusting herself. The echoes of their past still resonated in the desert wind, a constant reminder of the pain and betrayal that had come before. Could they truly overcome that? Could they build something new and lasting on the foundation of their shattered dreams? Chapter 6. The Price of Loyalty and Lies. The agreement, forged beneath the ancient oak, felt both fragile and strangely solid. Loretta rode back to her homestead with a mix of trepidation and a hesitant, unfamiliar sense of hope. The prospect of marrying Wade Coulter was daunting, a leap of faith into an uncertain future. But it was also a chance to secure her home, to reclaim a piece of her past, and perhaps to find a measure of peace. The news of their impending marriage spread through Redemption like wildfire. The townsfolk, a mix of ranchers, shopkeepers, and miners, were stunned, their reactions ranging from disbelief to outright disapproval. Loretta had always been a quiet, solitary figure, respected but distant. Wade, on the other hand, was an outsider, a man with a shadowed past and a reputation that preceded him. The most vocal opposition came from Sarah Jenkins, the owner of the town's general store and a longtime friend of Loretta's. Sarah, a stout, no-nonsense woman with a sharp tongue and a kind heart, cornered Loretta in the store the day after the announcement. "Loretta Hayes, have you lost your mind?" Sarah demanded, her hands on her ample hips, her voice echoing through the store. "Marrying that outlaw? After all he put you through?" Loretta sighed, leaning against the counter, feeling the weight of the town's scrutiny. "It's not what you think, Sarah," she said, trying to explain the complex arrangement, the tangled web of past and present that had led to this decision. "It's a business arrangement," she continued, "a way for me to keep my homestead, and for him to reclaim his family's land." She knew how it sounded. Cold. Calculated. A far cry from the romantic ideals of marriage. Sarah snorted, unconvinced. "And you think that's all it is? You think you can just ignore the history between you two? The pain he caused you?" Loretta flinched, the words hitting a raw nerve. "I haven't forgotten, Sarah," she said quietly. "But I'm not the same woman I was back then. I'm stronger now. I can handle this." Sarah looked at her, her expression softening slightly. "I hope you're right, Loretta," she said, her voice laced with concern.
I truly do.
"But I've seen men like Wade Coulter before. They're like rattlesnakes, charming and dangerous. You turn your back for a second and they strike." The warning hung in the air, a stark reminder of the risks involved. Loretta knew Sarah was right. That Wade was a complex and potentially dangerous man. But she also saw something else in him, a vulnerability, a weariness that mirrored her own. She saw a man who, like her, was haunted by the past, a man who was searching for a way to make amends, to find redemption. Later that day, Loretta received another visitor, this one far less welcome. Sheriff Thompson, the young, inexperienced lawman who had replaced the corrupt Sheriff Brody, arrived at her homestead, his face grim, his hand resting nervously on the butt of his revolver. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, his voice hesitant, "I need to ask you some questions about Wade Coulter." Loretta's heart sank. She'd known this was coming, that Wade's past would inevitably catch up with him, with them. "What kind of questions?" she asked, her voice steady, despite the tremor of fear that ran through her. "There are rumors," Thompson said, his gaze shifting uncomfortably. "Rumors about his involvement in certain activities. Before he came back to redemption." Loretta knew exactly what he was talking about. Wade had been an outlaw, a member of a notorious gang that had terrorized the territory years ago. He'd left that life behind, or so he claimed, but the past had a way of casting a long shadow. "Wade has changed," Loretta said, her voice firm, defending him despite her own lingering doubts. "He's not the same man he was." Thompson looked unconvinced. "Maybe," he said, his voice skeptical. "But I have a duty to uphold the law, Mrs. Hayes. And if those rumors are true, I'll have to arrest him." The threat hung in the air, a chilling reminder of the precariousness of their situation. Loretta knew that Wade's past could destroy everything, could shatter the fragile peace they were trying to build. She also knew that she had a choice to make. She could stand by him, defend him, even if it meant lying to the sheriff, risking her own reputation, her own safety. Or she could distance herself, protect herself, let Wade face the consequences of his actions alone. She met the sheriff's gaze, her expression resolute. The price of loyalty, of keeping the secrets of the past and the lies they created together, was high. And she was the only person she knew who could make the next move. She would stand by the bargain. Chapter 7. Scars Beneath the Surface. "Sheriff Thompson," Loretta began, her voice calm and measured, betraying none of the internal turmoil she felt. "Wade Coulter has told me about his past. He's been honest with me about the mistakes he made. But he's also made it clear that he's turned his back on that life. He's here to reclaim his family's land, to start over." She paused, choosing her words carefully, knowing that any misstep could have devastating consequences. "I understand your concerns, Sheriff, and I appreciate your diligence. But I believe Wade deserves a chance."
"He's not the same man he was."
Thompson studied her, his young face etched with doubt. He was clearly torn between his duty to uphold the law and his reluctance to confront a man with Wade Coulter's reputation. "I hope you're right, Mrs. Hayes," he said finally, his voice still laced with skepticism. For your sake and for his. But I'll be watching him
Closely.
He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture of farewell and turned to leave, his horse's hooves kicking up dust as he rode away. Loretta watched him go, her heart heavy with a mixture of relief and foreboding. She'd bought Wade some time, but she knew it was only a temporary reprieve. The past had a way of catching up, of demanding its due. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the desert, Wade arrived at her homestead. He'd been working on the Bar X, preparing for their move, his presence a constant, unsettling reminder of the life she was about to embark on. He found her sitting on the porch, her gaze fixed on the distant mountains, her expression thoughtful. He approached her quietly, his steps silent on the wooden planks. "You talked to the sheriff," he said, his voice low, a statement, not a question. Loretta nodded, turning to face him. "He came by this afternoon, asking questions about your past." Wade's jaw tightened, his eyes hardening. "What did you tell him?" "I told him the truth," she said, meeting his gaze head-on. "That you told me about your past, that you'd changed, that you deserved a chance." He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. She saw a flicker of surprise in his eyes, perhaps even a hint of gratitude.
Why?
He asked, his voice rough. "Why would you defend me after everything?" Loretta sighed, looking away, her gaze drifting back to the mountains. "Because I believe in second chances, Wade," she said softly. "And because I made a promise. To you and to myself." He stepped closer, his presence filling the space between them, the scent of leather and dust, and something indefinably him reaching her. "You could have turned me in," he said, his voice low. "Saved yourself a lot of trouble." "Maybe," she said, meeting his gaze again. "But that's not who I am. I don't abandon people, Wade. Not anymore." The words hung in the air, a reference to their shared past, to her flight from him, to her betrayal. He flinched, almost imperceptibly, but Loretta saw it. The pain, the regret, the lingering hurt that still simmered beneath the surface. He reached out, his calloused hand gently touching her cheek, a gesture that mirrored the one he'd made the day he'd proposed. It was a gesture of tenderness, of vulnerability, that belied his rough exterior. "Thank you, Loretta," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "For believing in me." His touch sent a shiver through her, a warmth that spread through her veins, chasing away the chill of the evening air. She saw a depth of emotion in his eyes that she hadn't seen before, a vulnerability that both frightened and intrigued her. "We all have scars, Wade," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "Scars beneath the surface. It's what we do with them that matters." He nodded, his gaze holding hers. "Maybe we can help each other heal, Loretta," he said, his voice a whisper. "Maybe we can find a way to move past the pain." The hope in his voice was a fragile thing, easily shattered by the harsh realities of their situation. But it was there, a flicker of light in the darkness, a promise of something more than just a marriage of convenience. It was a promise of healing, of forgiveness, of a second chance at a love they'd both thought lost forever. But the scars ran deep, both visible and hidden, and the journey to healing would be long and arduous, fraught with challenges and the ever-present threat of the past resurfacing to destroy the fragile peace they were trying to build. The sheriff's visit was just a warning, a little storm before the real weather arrived. Chapter 8. A Dance with Danger and Desire. The days leading up to the wedding were a blur of activity, a whirlwind of preparations and unsettling emotions. Loretta and Wade worked side by side, preparing the Bar X for their combined lives. They mended fences, repaired the dilapidated barn, and tended to the neglected livestock. The physical labor was demanding, but it was also a welcome distraction, a way to avoid the awkward silences and the unspoken questions that hung between them. They worked together with a surprising efficiency, their movements synchronized, their skills complementing each other. Loretta was surprised by Wade's knowledge of ranching, his gentle hand with the animals, his quiet competence. She saw a side of him she hadn't known existed, a side that was far removed from the reckless outlaw she'd once loved. But beneath the surface of their practical partnership, A current of tension simmered. The unspoken desires, the lingering resentments, the ghosts of their shared past, it all swirled between them, a dangerous dance of attraction and apprehension. One evening, after a long day of work, they found themselves sitting on the porch of the Bar X ranch house, sharing a simple meal of beans and cornbread. The sun had set, painting the sky in hues of fiery orange and deep purple, the air cooling with the approaching night. "It's beautiful here," Loretta said softly, her gaze sweeping across the vast expanse of the ranch, the rolling hills bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. Wade nodded, his eyes following hers. "It is," he agreed. "It always was." Even when everything was falling apart, the unspoken words hung between them, a reference to his father's death, the loss of the ranch, the betrayal he'd suffered at Loretta's hands. Loretta looked at him, her heart aching with a mixture of guilt and regret. "I'm sorry, Wade," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "For everything." He turned to face her, his eyes searching her face. "I know you are," he said, his voice rough. "But sorry doesn't change the past." "No," she agreed, "it doesn't. But maybe it can help us build a future." He reached out, his hand covering hers, his touch sending a jolt of warmth through her. "Maybe," he said, his voice hopeful. Their gazes locked, and for a moment, the years melted away. They were no longer the hardened rancher and the outlaw's bride, but the young lovers they'd once been, full of dreams and promises. The attraction between them was undeniable, a palpable force that drew them together, despite the pain and mistrust that still lingered. But the moment was fleeting, broken by the sudden sound of approaching horses. A group of riders emerged from the shadows, their faces obscured by the darkness, their intentions unclear. Wade stood up, his body tense, his hand instinctively moving to the gun at his hip. "Who's there?" he demanded, his voice sharp and commanding. The riders stopped a short distance from the porch, their horses shifting nervously. One of the men, a tall, burly figure with a scar across his face, stepped forward. "We're looking for Wade Coulter," he said, his voice gruff, his eyes narrowed. Loretta's heart pounded in her chest. She recognized the man, knew his reputation. He was Bart Hogan, a notorious outlaw, a former associate of Wade's. "I'm Coulter," Wade said, his voice steady, his gaze unwavering. "What do you want?" Hogan grinned, a cruel, predatory smile that sent a shiver down Loretta's spine. "We heard you were back in town, Coulter," he said. "Heard you were getting married. Thought we'd pay you a little visit, welcome you back to the territory." The threat was clear, the danger palpable. Loretta knew that Hogan and his men weren't there for a social call. They were there to settle old scores, to remind Wade of his past, to test his loyalty. Wade stood his ground, his hand still resting on his gun. "I'm not interested in your welcome, Hogan," he said, his voice cold. "I'm out of that life. I'm building a new one here." "A new life with her?" sneered Hogan. He was going to push, Loretta realized. He was going to push, and Wade would have to prove, once again, where his loyalties lay. Chapter 9. The Unraveling of Secrets. Hogan's sneer twisted his scarred face into a mask of malice. He gestured towards Loretta with a dismissive flick of his wrist. "The rancher's daughter? The one who ran off with your inheritance? Seems like a strange choice for a fresh start, Coulter." Wade's jaw tightened, his eyes flickering with anger. "Loretta is my wife," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "And I'll thank you to speak of her with respect." Hogan laughed, a harsh, mocking sound that echoed in the twilight. "Respect? For a thief? For a woman who betrayed you?" Loretta felt a surge of anger, a fierce protectiveness towards Wade, despite the complicated emotions she still harbored towards him. She stepped forward, standing beside him, her shoulder brushing against his. "I made mistakes," she said, her voice clear and steady, meeting Hogan's gaze head-on. "But I'm not ashamed of who I am. And I won't let you insult me or Wade." Hogan's eyes narrowed, surprised by her defiance. He looked from Loretta to Wade, a calculating glint in his gaze. "You've changed, Coulter," he said, his voice softer now, but no less threatening. "Gone soft. Settled down." I've grown up, Hogan, Wade retorted, his voice cold. I've learned that there's more to life than running and fighting. Maybe, Hogan said, his voice skeptical. Or maybe you're just hiding, waiting for the right moment to rejoin us. The accusation hung in the air, a challenge and a threat. Loretta knew that Hogan was trying to provoke Wade, to force him to show his true colors. He wanted to see if Wade was still the ruthless outlaw he'd once known, or if he'd truly changed. Wade didn't flinch, didn't back down. I'm not hiding, Hogan, he said, his voice firm. I'm building a life here, with Loretta. And I won't let you, or anyone else, threaten that. Hogan studied him for a long moment, his eyes searching his face. He saw the determination in Wade's gaze, the unwavering resolve. He saw the love and protectiveness he felt for Loretta. We'll see, Coulter, Hogan said finally, his voice laced with a lingering threat. We'll see. He turned his horse and rode away, his men following close behind, disappearing into the darkness. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with unspoken tension. Loretta let out a shaky breath, her body trembling with adrenaline. She looked at Wade, her eyes searching his face. Do you think they'll be back? He shook his head, his expression grim. I don't know, Loretta, he said, his voice rough. Hogan's a dangerous man. He doesn't like loose ends. Loose ends? She echoed, her heart sinking. What does that mean? He hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his features. It means there are things about my past, about my time with Hogan's gang, that I haven't told you. The words hit her like a physical blow. She'd known there were secrets, had sensed the unspoken truths that lay beneath the surface. But hearing him admit it, confirming her fears, was devastating. What kind of things, Wade? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. He looked away, his gaze drifting towards the distant horizon, his expression troubled. Things I'm not proud of, Loretta, he said, his voice low. Things that could endanger us both. He explained, slowly and reluctantly, about the robberies, the violence, the betrayals that had been a part of his life as an outlaw. He told her about a particular robbery, a train heist that had gone wrong, resulting in the death of a guard. He'd never pulled the trigger, he insisted, but he'd been there, a part of it, complicit in the crime. The revelation was a crushing weight, shattering the fragile trust they'd been building. Loretta felt a wave of despair, a sense of betrayal that mirrored the pain she'd felt 15 years ago. Why didn't you tell me? She asked, her voice trembling. Why did you keep this from me? He turned back to face her, his eyes filled with regret. I was afraid, Loretta, he said, his voice raw. Afraid of losing you. Afraid of what you would think of me. The honesty in his voice was a small comfort, but it wasn't enough to erase the pain, the fear, the renewed sense of uncertainty that now consumed her. The unraveling of secrets had begun, and she knew that this was just the beginning. There were more shadows lurking in the darkness, more truths waiting to be revealed, and she was terrified of what they might be, of how they might destroy the fragile hope of a future together. Hogan's visit was just the start. The train heist, the death, it all pointed to deeper, darker secrets. Chapter 10. Broken Trust and Shattered Dreams. The weight of Wade's confession hung heavy in the air, a suffocating presence that seemed to steal the very breath from Loretta's lungs. The image of the life they were trying to build, the fragile hope of a second chance, crumbled before her eyes, replaced by the stark reality of his past, a past far darker and more dangerous than she'd ever imagined. You should have told me, Wade, she said, her voice a choked whisper, tears welling in her eyes. Before we got married. Before everything. He reached out to her, his hand hovering hesitantly over her arm, but he didn't touch her. I know, he said, his voice rough with regret. I should have. But I was a coward, Loretta. I was afraid of losing you again. Losing me? She echoed, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. You lost me 15 years ago, Wade. When you chose that life, that violence. He flinched at her words, the pain evident in his eyes. I made mistakes, Loretta, he said, his voice pleading. Terrible mistakes. But I'm not that man anymore. I swear to you I've changed. Changed? She repeated, her voice rising in anger. How can I believe that? How can I trust anything you say when you've kept such a huge part of your life a secret from me? She turned away from him, walking towards the edge of the porch, her gaze fixed on the vast, dark expanse of the desert. The night, once a source of comfort and solace, now seemed to mirror the darkness and uncertainty that consumed her. I don't know what to do, Wade, she said, her voice trembling. I don't know if I can do this. He came up behind her, his presence a warm, unsettling weight at her back. He didn't touch her, but she could feel his gaze on her, his silent plea for understanding, for forgiveness. Give me a chance, Loretta, he said, his voice low and urgent. Let me prove to you that I've changed, that I'm worthy of your trust. Trust? She repeated, turning to face him, her eyes flashing with anger. Trust is earned, Wade. It's not something you can just demand. And you've broken that trust, shattered it into a million pieces. He looked at her, his expression a mixture of pain and determination. I know I have, he said, his voice firm. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to earn it back.
If you'll let me.
The sincerity in his voice, the raw emotion in his eyes, gave her pause. She saw the man he was trying to be, the man he could be, beneath the scars of his past. But the fear was still there, the fear of being hurt again, the fear of trusting a man who had lived a life of violence and deception. I need time, Wade, she said, her voice softening slightly.
Time to think.
Time to process everything. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. I know, he said, his voice quiet. I'll give you all the time you need. He turned to leave, walking towards the barn, his silhouette disappearing into the darkness. Loretta watched him go, her heart aching with a mixture of grief, anger, and a lingering, stubborn hope. The dreams they'd shared, the future they'd envisioned, were shattered, broken by the weight of his past. But perhaps, just perhaps, they could be salvaged, rebuilt, stronger and more resilient than before. But it would take time, patience, and a willingness to confront the darkness, to heal the wounds that ran so deep. It would take a leap of faith, a willingness to trust again, to believe in the possibility of redemption. And she didn't know if she was capable of that, if her heart could withstand another betrayal. The train, the guard, the lies, it was all a tangled mess, and she was right in the middle of it, with no clear way out. Chapter 11. The Heart's Reckoning. The following days were a strained, silent dance between Loretta and Wade. They continued to work on the ranch, their movements synchronized, their communication minimal. The unspoken tension hung heavy between them, a constant reminder of the broken trust, the shattered dreams. Loretta found herself watching Wade, searching his face for any sign of deception, any hint of the outlaw he'd once been. She saw the weariness in his eyes, the lines of regret etched around his mouth, the quiet determination that seemed to drive him. She spent hours alone, wandering the vast expanse of the ranch, seeking solace in the solitude, in the beauty of the unforgiving landscape. She thought about her life, her choices, the path that had led her to this moment. She thought about her father, his cruelty, his controlling nature, the way he'd tried to dictate her future. She thought about Wade, his charm, his wildness, the way he'd made her feel alive, the way he'd broken her heart. She realized that she'd been running for most of her life, running from her father, running from Wade, running from herself. She'd built walls around her heart, protecting herself from pain, from vulnerability. But those walls had also kept her isolated, alone, preventing her from truly connecting with anyone, from experiencing the fullness of life. One afternoon, she found herself at the creek, the same creek where she and Wade had met as teenagers, the same creek where he'd proposed to her just weeks before. She sat beneath the old oak tree, its branches reaching towards the sky like gnarled fingers, its leaves rustling in the breeze. She closed her eyes, listening to the gentle murmur of the water, the sounds of the desert, the whispers of her own heart. She realized that she was still in love with Wade, despite everything, despite the pain, the betrayal, the secrets. She loved the man he was trying to be, the man he could be if he was given a chance. But love wasn't enough. Trust was essential, and that trust had been broken. Could she ever truly trust him again? Could she risk opening her heart to him, knowing the potential for pain, for disappointment? She thought about the life they could build together, the ranch, the partnership, the possibility of a family. She thought about the alternative, a life alone, a life of quiet desperation, a life without the spark of passion, the challenge of connection. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the landscape, Loretta made her decision. She couldn't go back, couldn't undo the past. But she could choose her future. She could choose to forgive, to trust, to take a leap of faith. She could choose to fight for the love she still felt, for the possibility of a life with Wade. She found him in the barn, tending to one of the horses, his movements gentle and sure. He looked up as she approached, his expression guarded, his eyes searching her face. "Wade," she said, her voice clear and steady, "I need to talk to you." He straightened, wiping his hands on a rag, his gaze unwavering.
"I'm listening."
She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what she was about to say. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "About us, about your past, about everything."
"And?"
he prompted, his voice low, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and apprehension. "And I've realized that I can't let fear control me," she said, her voice gaining strength. "I can't let the past dictate my future. I still love you, Wade. Despite everything." His eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprise crossing his features. He took a step towards her, his hand reaching out, but he stopped short of touching her. "Loretta," he began, his voice husky with emotion. "But," she continued, holding up her hand to stop him, "love isn't enough. We need trust. And that's something we have to rebuild.
Together."
She told him about her decision, about her willingness to forgive, to give him another chance, but also about her need for honesty, for transparency. She told him that she needed to know everything about his past, about his time with Hogan's gang, about the train robbery, about everything. He listened patiently, his expression unchanging. When she was finished, he nodded slowly. "I understand," he said, his voice firm. "And I'll tell you everything. No more secrets. No more lies." He spent the next few hours telling her the whole story, the unvarnished truth of his life as an outlaw. He told her about the robberies, the violence, the betrayals, the regrets. He told her about the train robbery in detail, about the guard who had died, about his own role in the tragedy. He didn't try to excuse his actions, didn't try to minimize his guilt. He simply laid it all bare, exposing the darkest parts of his soul. The heart's reckoning had begun, and it was more painful than either of them had imagined. He held nothing back. Chapter 12. Crossroads of Fate and Freedom. Listening to Wade's confession was like enduring a slow, agonizing surgery without anesthesia. Each detail, each revelation of his past was a fresh wound, a reminder of the violence and deception that had once been a part of his life. Loretta listened in silence, her heart aching with a mixture of grief, anger, and a surprising, resilient compassion. He spoke of the thrill of the outlaw life, the camaraderie, the sense of freedom, but also of the constant fear, the paranoia, the guilt that gnawed at his conscience. He described the train robbery with a chilling clarity, the chaos, the panic, the moment the guard had fallen, the sickening realization of what they'd done. "I didn't pull the trigger, Loretta," he said, his voice raw with emotion, his eyes pleading for understanding. "But I was there. I was responsible. I could have stopped it, but I didn't." The weight of his guilt was palpable, a heavy burden that he'd carried for years. Loretta saw the pain in his eyes, the self-loathing, the desperate desire for redemption. When he was finished, the silence that fell between them was profound, filled with the weight of unspoken emotions. The moon had risen, casting a pale, ethereal light over the barn, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Loretta finally spoke, her voice soft but firm. "Thank you, Wade," she said, "for telling me the truth, for trusting me with it." He looked at her, his eyes searching her face. Can you forgive me?" he asked, his voice hesitant, his hope fragile. Loretta didn't answer immediately. She thought about forgiveness, about what it truly meant. It wasn't about condoning his actions, about erasing the past. It was about accepting the truth, about acknowledging the pain, and about choosing to move forward, to build a future based on honesty and trust. Forgiveness isn't a single act, Wade, she said finally. It's a process, a journey. And it's not just about me forgiving you. It's about you forgiving yourself. She saw a flicker of understanding in his eyes, a glimmer of hope. I don't know if I can ever forgive myself, Loretta, he said, his voice heavy with self-reproach. Maybe not, she agreed. But you can learn to live with it. To make amends.
To be a better man.
She reached out, taking his hand in hers, her touch gentle but firm. I'm willing to take that journey with you, Wade, she said, her voice filled with a newfound strength. But it has to be together. No more secrets. No more lies. Complete honesty, complete transparency. He squeezed her hand, his eyes filled with gratitude and a renewed determination. I promise you, Loretta, he said, his voice firm. From now on, it's just the truth. Between us and with everyone else. The decision, the commitment, hung in the air between them, a fragile but powerful bond. They had reached a crossroads, a turning point in their relationship, in their lives. They had chosen to confront the past, to face the darkness, and to strive for a future based on honesty, trust, and a love that had endured despite everything. But the path ahead was still uncertain. The consequences of Wade's past still loomed, the threat of Hogan and his gang, the possibility of arrest, the judgment of the community. They were standing at a precipice, with the freedom to forge a new life together, or the fate of being torn apart by the shadows of their past. As they walked out of the barn, hand in hand, the vast, starlit sky above them seemed to offer both a challenge and a promise. A challenge to overcome the obstacles that lay ahead, and a promise of a future where redemption was possible, where love could triumph over adversity, where two scarred souls could find solace and healing in each other's arms. They couldn't know what was going to come calling in the morning, or the choices they'd have to make. Chapter 13. Whispers of Betrayal in the Dark. The fragile peace they'd found was shattered just a few days later. Loretta awoke before dawn, the sky still a deep indigo, the air crisp and cool. She found Wade already up, standing on the porch, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon, his expression troubled. What is it? She asked, her heart sinking with a sense of foreboding. He turned to face her, his eyes dark and serious. Riders, he said, his voice low. Coming this way.
Fast.
Loretta's blood ran cold. She knew who it was. Hogan. And his gang. They'd come back, just as Wade had feared. How many? She asked, her voice trembling. At least a dozen, he replied, his jaw tight. Heavily armed. They had little time to prepare. Wade grabbed his rifle, checking the ammunition, his movements quick and efficient. Loretta armed herself with a shotgun, her hands shaking, but her determination firm. We can't stay here, Wade said, his voice urgent. We're outnumbered. We need to get to higher ground. They saddled their horses, their movements swift and silent, the urgency of the situation lending them a desperate strength. They rode out of the ranch yard, heading towards the rocky hills that bordered the property, seeking refuge in the rugged terrain. As they rode, Loretta could hear the pounding of hooves behind them, the shouts of the approaching riders, the chilling sound of gunfire. They were being pursued, hunted like animals. They reached the foothills, dismounting and leading their horses through the narrow, treacherous paths, seeking a defensible position. Wade found a small cave, hidden behind a cluster of boulders, a natural fortress that offered some protection. We'll make our stand here, he said, his voice grim. It's the best we can do. They waited, their hearts pounding in their chests, the silence broken only by the wind whistling through the rocks, the distant sounds of their pursuers. Loretta held the shotgun tight, her finger on the trigger, her body trembling with fear, but also with a fierce determination to protect herself, to protect Wade. The first riders appeared, silhouetted against the rising sun, their faces obscured by shadows, their weapons glinting in the morning light. Hogan was among them, his scarred face twisted in a cruel grin. "Come out, Coulter," he shouted, his voice echoing through the hills. "You can't hide from us. We know about the train, about the guard." The words hit Loretta like a physical blow. So, Hogan knew the details of Wade's past, the secret he'd confessed to her. But how? Who had betrayed them? Wade's eyes narrowed, his expression hardening. "I'm not hiding, Hogan," he shouted back. "I'm right here."
Come and get me.
The gunfight began, a furious exchange of fire that shattered the stillness of the morning. Bullets whizzed past Loretta's head, ricocheting off the rocks, the air filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder. Wade fought with a fierce determination, his movements precise and deadly. He was a skilled marksman, his shots finding their targets with unnerving accuracy. But they were outnumbered, outgunned, their position precarious. As the fighting raged, Loretta's gaze fell on one of the riders, a man she recognized. It was Jed, one of the ranch hands who had worked for her father, a man she'd known for years, a man she'd trusted. He was riding with Hogan, his face contorted with hatred, his gun aimed at Wade. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. Jed was the betrayer. He was the one who had told Hogan about Wade's past, about the train robbery. He was the one who had led them here, to this trap. The whispers of betrayal in the dark had finally revealed their source, a source she'd never suspected, a source that cut her to the core. And now, she and Wade were paying the price for her misplaced trust, trapped in a desperate fight for their lives, with the odds stacked heavily against them. Jed, it couldn't be, but it was. Chapter 14. The Ghost of Promises Past. The realization that Jed, a man she'd considered a friend, had betrayed them fueled Loretta's anger and sharpened her resolve. She raised her shotgun, aiming at Jed, her finger tightening on the trigger. But before she could fire, a bullet whizzed past her head, forcing her to duck for cover. Wade grabbed her arm, pulling her further into the cave. "Stay down, Loretta," he shouted, his voice urgent. "You'll get yourself killed." She struggled against his grip, her eyes still fixed on Jed.
"He's the one, Wade," she cried.
"He betrayed us. He told Hogan everything." Wade followed her gaze, his expression hardening as he saw Jed riding with Hogan's gang. He'd suspected someone had been feeding Hogan information, but he hadn't known who. Now, seeing Jed, a man Loretta had trusted, a man who had worked on the ranch for years, the pieces fell into place. "Damn him," Wade muttered, his voice filled with a cold fury. "He was always jealous. Jealous of my father, of the ranch, of you." The gunfight continued, a relentless barrage of bullets that echoed through the hills. Wade returned fire, his shots precise and deadly, but they were running out of ammunition, their position becoming increasingly desperate. "We need to get out of here, Loretta," Wade said, his voice grim. "We can't hold them off much longer." He had a plan, a desperate gamble that might give them a chance to escape. He explained it to her quickly, his words clipped and urgent. They would use the remaining ammunition to create a diversion, then make a run for their horses, hoping to outrun the outlaws in the rugged terrain. It was a risky plan with little chance of success, but it was their only option. They waited for a lull in the firing. Then Wade tossed a stick of dynamite towards the outlaws, creating a deafening explosion that sent rocks and debris flying. "Now, Loretta," he shouted, grabbing her hand and pulling her out of the cave. They ran, scrambling over rocks, dodging bullets, their hearts pounding in their chests. They reached their horses, mounting quickly and spurring them into a gallop, heading towards a narrow canyon that offered a potential escape route. Hogan and his men pursued them relentlessly, their horses' hooves thundering on the rocky ground, their shouts echoing through the canyon. Bullets whizzed past them, close enough to feel the wind of their passage. As they rode, Loretta's mind raced, trying to understand Jed's betrayal. Why would he do this? What had she ever done to him? She remembered him as a quiet, unassuming man, always respectful, always helpful. But beneath that facade, There had clearly been a darkness, a resentment that had festered for years. She thought about her father, his harshness, his favoritism, the way he'd treated his employees. Had he created this bitterness, this desire for revenge? Had Jed's betrayal been a twisted form of retribution against her father? Against her? The canyon narrowed, the walls rising steeply on either side, the path treacherous and winding. They were gaining ground on their pursuers, but the outlaws were still close behind. Suddenly, a shot rang out, and Loretta felt a searing pain in her shoulder. She cried out, losing her grip on the reins, her body slumping in the saddle. Wade saw her fall, his heart leaping into his throat. He wheeled his horse around, riding back towards her, ignoring the bullets that whizzed past him. He reached her side, scooping her up in his arms, holding her close. "Loretta, are you all right?" he shouted, his voice filled with panic. She was pale, her face contorted with pain, blood staining her shirt. I've been shot," she gasped, her voice weak. The ghost of promises past seemed to swirl around them, the echoes of their youthful dreams mocking their desperate plight. He'd promised to protect her, to keep her safe, and now, here she was wounded, possibly dying, because of his past, because of the choices he'd made. He'd promised her safety.
And he'd failed.
The weight was almost unbearable. Chapter 15. A Flame in the Wilderness. Wade's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic rhythm of fear and desperation. He held Loretta close, his arms supporting her wounded shoulder, his gaze scanning the canyon for any sign of pursuit. Hogan and his men were still behind them, their shouts and gunfire echoing through the narrow passage, but they were gaining ground. He had to get her to safety, had to find a place to tend to her wound. He urged his horse forward, guiding it through the treacherous terrain, his mind racing, searching for a solution. He remembered a small cabin, hidden in a secluded valley, a place he'd used as a hideout years ago, during his outlaw days. It was a long shot, but it was their only hope. He rode with a desperate urgency, his horse's hooves pounding on the rocky ground, the wind whipping through his hair. He spoke to Loretta softly, reassuringly, trying to keep her conscious, trying to keep her alive. "Hold on, Loretta," he murmured, his voice choked with emotion. "We're almost there. Just a little further." She nodded weakly, her eyes fluttering open and closed, her breath shallow and ragged. He could feel her body trembling against his, her warmth fading, her life slipping away. They finally reached the valley, a hidden oasis of green nestled amidst the barren hills. The cabin was still there, weathered and dilapidated, but intact. He dismounted, carefully lifting Loretta from the saddle, carrying her inside. The cabin was small and dusty, furnished with only a crude bed, a table, and a fireplace. But it was shelter, a refuge from the pursuing outlaws, a place to tend to Loretta's wound. He laid her gently on the bed, his hands shaking as he examined her injury. The bullet had grazed her shoulder, tearing through the flesh, but it didn't appear to have hit any vital organs. It was a serious wound, but not necessarily fatal. He ripped strips of cloth from his shirt, using them to staunch the bleeding, his movements quick and efficient, his knowledge of first aid honed by years of living on the edge. He cleaned the wound with water from his canteen, his touch gentle, his concern evident in his eyes. Loretta moaned softly, her eyes flickering open. "Wade," she whispered, her voice weak. "I'm here, Loretta," he said, his voice soothing. "I'm right here. You're going to be all right." He built a fire in the fireplace, the flames casting a warm, flickering light over the cabin, chasing away the chill of the evening air. He heated water, using it to make a poultice of herbs he'd gathered outside, applying it to her wound to reduce the inflammation and prevent infection. He sat beside her, holding her hand, watching over her as she drifted in and out of consciousness. He spoke to her softly, telling her stories of their past, of their youthful dreams, of the future they were trying to build. As the night wore on, a fever set in, Loretta's body burning with heat, her mind wandering in delirium. She called out for her father, for Wade, for her mother, her words a jumbled mix of memories and fears. Wade stayed by her side, bathing her forehead with cool water, whispering words of comfort, his heart aching with a mixture of guilt, fear, and a fierce, protective love. He'd brought her to this pain, to this danger. He'd failed to protect her, failed to keep her safe. But he wouldn't fail her now. He would stay with her, fight for her, do everything in his power to save her life. He would nurture the flame of hope that still flickered within him, the hope that they could survive this, that they could overcome the darkness of their past, that they could build a future together. The wilderness surrounded them, vast and unforgiving, but within the small cabin, a flame of love and determination burned brightly, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a beacon of hope in the face of adversity. He was running out of options and fast. Chapter 16. The Outlaw's Code. As Loretta's fever raged, Wade knew he had to make a difficult choice. He couldn't stay in the cabin indefinitely. Hogan and his men would eventually find them, and they were running out of supplies, out of time. He had to get Loretta to a doctor, to someone who could properly treat her wound and prevent infection from setting in. But leaving the relative safety of the cabin meant risking capture, risking another confrontation with Hogan. It was a gamble, a desperate choice between two dangerous options. He decided to ride to Redemption, to seek help from Sarah Jenkins, the owner of the general store and Loretta's longtime friend. He knew it was a risk, exposing himself to the sheriff, to the townspeople, but he trusted Sarah, knew her to be a woman of courage and compassion. Before dawn, he carefully wrapped Loretta in blankets, securing her to his horse, his movements gentle and deliberate. He whispered words of reassurance to her, even though she was unconscious, unable to hear him. "I'll be back, Loretta," he promised, his voice choked with emotion. "I swear to you, I'll come back for you." He rode swiftly, silently, avoiding the main roads, sticking to the shadows, his senses on high alert. He reached Redemption just as the sun was rising, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. He left his horse hidden outside of town, approaching Sarah's store on foot, his hand resting on the butt of his gun. He slipped through the back door, finding Sarah in the storeroom, taking inventory of her supplies. She looked up, startled by his sudden appearance, her eyes widening in surprise and alarm. "Wade Coulter," she exclaimed, her voice a hushed whisper. "What are you doing here? The sheriff's looking for you." He quickly explained the situation, his words clipped and urgent, telling her about Loretta's injury, about Hogan's pursuit, about Jed's betrayal. Sarah listened intently, her expression a mixture of concern and determination. She didn't hesitate. "Bring her here, Wade," she said, her voice firm. "I'll take care of her. And I'll send for Doc Miller." Wade was overwhelmed with relief, with gratitude for Sarah's unwavering support. He knew he was asking a lot of her, risking her own safety, her own reputation, but she didn't flinch. He retrieved Loretta from his horse, carrying her carefully into the store, laying her gently on a makeshift bed Sarah had prepared in the back room. Doc Miller, an elderly, gruff but skilled physician, arrived soon after, examining Loretta's wound, his expression grim. "She's lost a lot of blood," he said, his voice concerned. "And the fever's high. But I think I can save her. It'll take time, though. And she'll need constant care." Wade stayed by Loretta's side, watching over her as Doc Miller worked, his heart aching with a mixture of hope and fear. He knew he should leave, should get out of town before the sheriff found him, but he couldn't bring himself to abandon Loretta, not now, not when she was so vulnerable. As the day wore on, word of Wade's return spread through Redemption. The townsfolk gathered outside the store, their reactions a mix of curiosity, fear, and disapproval. Sheriff Thompson arrived, his face grim, his hand resting on his gun. Sarah met him at the door, blocking his entrance. "You can't come in here, Sheriff," she said, her voice firm. "Loretta's injured. She needs rest. And Wade, he's helping her." Thompson hesitated, torn between his duty to uphold the law and his reluctance to confront a man with Wade Coulter's reputation, especially with the townspeople watching. He was young, inexperienced. This was a test. "He's a wanted man, Sarah," Thompson said, his voice uncertain. I have to arrest him. Not today, Sheriff, Sarah retorted, her voice unwavering. Today, he's just a man trying to save the woman he loves. Let him be. The townsfolk murmured their agreement, their sympathy shifting towards Wade, towards Loretta. They had witnessed their struggle, their love, their courage. They had seen the outlaw's code, the unwavering loyalty, the willingness to sacrifice everything for the one he loved. Thompson, sensing the shift in the town's mood, backed down, reluctantly agreeing to wait. He posted a deputy outside the store, a silent guard, a reminder of the precariousness of Wade's situation. But for now, Wade was safe, able to stay by Loretta's side, able to fight for her life, able to prove that he was more than just an outlaw, that he was a man capable of love, of loyalty, of redemption. The code was simple. Protect what's yours. And he would. Chapter 17. Riding through the storm. The next few days were a blur of anxious waiting, of tending to Loretta's fever, of whispered prayers and desperate hopes. Wade never left her side, sleeping in a chair next to her bed, his hand resting on hers, his presence a constant source of comfort and strength. Doc Miller visited regularly, checking Loretta's wound, administering medicine, his prognosis cautiously optimistic. Sarah Jenkins provided food, supplies, and unwavering support, her friendship a lifeline in the midst of the storm. Sheriff Thompson remained outside, a silent, watchful presence, a reminder of the precariousness of their situation. He was waiting, biding his time, unsure of what to do. He had witnessed Wade's devotion to Loretta, his willingness to risk everything for her, and it had shaken his preconceived notions about the outlaw, about the man. The townsfolk, too, were watching, their initial hostility towards Wade gradually softening, replaced by a grudging respect, even admiration. They had seen the outlaw's code in action, the unwavering loyalty, the fierce protectiveness, and it had resonated with them, reminding them of the values they held dear, the values that had shaped their lives in the harsh, unforgiving landscape of the frontier. As Loretta slowly began to recover, her fever breaking, her strength returning, Wade knew he had to make a decision about their future. He couldn't stay in redemption indefinitely. Hogan and his men were still out there, a constant threat, and the sheriff, despite his temporary reprieve, would eventually be forced to act. He spoke to Loretta one evening, as she lay in bed, her eyes still weak but clear, her hand holding his. "We need to leave, Loretta," he said, his voice low and gentle. "We need to find a place where we can be safe, where we can build a life together, away from the shadows of my past." She nodded, her gaze holding his. "I know," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I'm ready. Whenever you are." He had a plan, a destination in mind. He had a friend, a former outlaw who had settled down, started a ranch in a remote valley in Montana, far from the reach of Hogan, far from the memories of his past. It was a long and dangerous journey, but it was their only hope for a future together. They left redemption under the cover of darkness, riding swiftly, silently, avoiding the main roads, sticking to the shadows. Sheriff Thompson, whether by choice or by circumstance, did not pursue them. He had seen enough, had witnessed the depth of their love, the strength of their bond, and he had made his own decision, a decision that went against the letter of the law, but aligned with the spirit of justice. The journey was arduous, fraught with challenges, but they faced them together, their love and determination fueling their resilience. They rode through storms, across deserts, over mountains, their bodies weary, their spirits tested, but their bond unbroken. Wade's past still haunted them, the threat of Hogan ever present, but they refused to let fear control them. They were riding towards a new life, a new beginning, a future where they could be free, where they could build a home, a family, a legacy that was not defined by violence and betrayal, but by love and redemption. They were riding through the storm, both literally and metaphorically, the wind and rain lashing against them, the darkness surrounding them, but their hearts were filled with a fierce, unwavering hope, a belief in the possibility of a brighter future, a future where they could finally be at peace, together. It was a gamble, but they'd bet on each other, and that was all that mattered. Chapter 18. Between Redemption and Ruin. The journey to Montana was a crucible, testing their strength, their resilience, and the very foundations of their relationship. They faced harsh weather, dwindling supplies, and the constant fear of being discovered, either by Hogan's gang or by lawmen who might recognize Wade. But through it all, their bond deepened, forged in the fires of adversity, tempered by the shared experience of hardship and hope. They spoke little, their communication often limited to a shared glance, a touch of hands, a silent understanding that transcended words. They were two souls, scarred by the past, striving for a future that seemed both precarious and promising. Wade was constantly vigilant, his senses on high alert, scanning the horizon for any sign of danger. He was a skilled tracker, a seasoned survivor, his instincts honed by years of living on the edge. He protected Loretta fiercely, shielding her from harm, his love for her a powerful, unwavering force. Loretta, though still recovering from her wound, proved to be a strong and resourceful companion. She tended to their meager supplies, cared for their horses, and offered Wade quiet encouragement, her presence a source of comfort and strength. She had shed the remnants of her former self, the woman who had been defined by fear and regret, and embraced the courageous, resilient spirit that had always been within her. One evening, as they camped beneath a vast, starlit sky, the silence broken only by the crackling of the campfire, Loretta spoke, her voice soft but firm. "Wade," she said, "we need to talk about what happens when we get to Montana." He looked at her, his eyes reflecting the flickering flames, his expression serious. "What do you mean?" "We can't just run forever," she said. "We need to face the past, somehow. We need to find a way to make peace with it." Wade nodded, his jaw tight. He knew she was right. He couldn't keep running, couldn't keep hiding from the consequences of his actions. He had to confront his past, had to find a way to atone for his mistakes. "I've been thinking about that," he said, his voice low. "About turning myself in. About confessing everything." Loretta's eyes widened in surprise, a mixture of fear and respect in her gaze. "Are you sure, Wade?" she asked. That's a huge risk." "I know," he said, "but it's the right thing to do. I can't build a future on lies, on secrets. I need to clear my conscience. To face the consequences." He explained his plan. He would contact a lawyer, someone he trusted, someone who could help him navigate the legal system, negotiate a plea, perhaps even secure a reduced sentence. He would tell the truth, the whole truth, about the train robbery, about his involvement, about everything. Loretta listened intently, her heart aching with a mixture of fear and pride. She was terrified of losing him, of being separated from him, but she also admired his courage, his willingness to face his demons, to seek redemption. "I'll stand by you, Wade," she said, her voice firm, her hand reaching out to grasp his. "No matter what happens, I'll be there." Their gazes locked, and in that moment, they knew that they had reached a new level of understanding, of commitment. They were standing between redemption and ruin, on the precipice of a future that was both uncertain and filled with a fragile, tenacious hope. They were choosing to face the darkness together, to fight for a life that was not defined by the shadows of their past, but by the promise of a new beginning. He knew that this was going to make or break everything he was trying to achieve. Chapter 19. The Cost of a Second Chance. They reached Montana after weeks of arduous travel, their bodies weary, their spirits tested, but their resolve unbroken. The valley where Wade's friend, Caleb, had settled was a breathtaking sight, a vast expanse of rolling hills, lush meadows, and towering mountains, a landscape that seemed to offer both solace and a sense of boundless possibility. Caleb, a former outlaw who had found redemption in a quiet life of ranching, welcomed them with open arms, offering them shelter, food, and a much-needed respite from their journey. He listened to Wade's story, his expression a mixture of concern and understanding. "It's a brave thing you're doing, Wade," Caleb said, his voice gruff but kind. "Facing your past like this. But it won't be easy. There'll be consequences. Wade nodded, his jaw tight.
I know, he said.
But I'm ready. I have to do this. For Loretta and for myself. Caleb contacted a lawyer in a nearby town, a man named Silas Martin, known for his integrity and his skill in navigating the complexities of the legal system. Martin agreed to meet with Wade, listening intently to his confession, his explanation of the events surrounding the train robbery, his willingness to cooperate with the authorities. It's a long shot, Wade, Martin said, his voice serious. But I believe you. I believe you've changed. And I'll do everything I can to help you. The legal process was slow and arduous, a complex web of negotiations, investigations, and legal maneuvering. Wade remained in Montana, working alongside Caleb on the ranch, while Loretta stayed with them, her presence a constant source of strength and support. The waiting was agonizing, the uncertainty weighing heavily on their hearts. They lived each day with a mixture of hope and fear, clinging to the belief that justice would prevail, that Wade's genuine remorse and his commitment to a new life would be recognized. Loretta wrote letters to Sheriff Thompson in redemption, to Sarah Jenkins, even to some of the townsfolk, telling them about Wade's transformation, about his dedication to her, about his desire to make amends for his past. She pleaded with them to speak on his behalf, to testify to his character, to help him secure a second chance. The responses were slow in coming, but eventually, letters began to arrive. Letters of support, letters of forgiveness, letters that spoke of Wade's bravery, his loyalty, his love for Loretta. Sarah Jenkins' letter was particularly moving, recounting Wade's selfless actions in protecting Loretta, in risking his own life to save hers. Sheriff Thompson, too, wrote a letter, a testament to Wade's character, a confirmation of his change, a plea for leniency. He had seen the Outlaw's Code, had witnessed the transformation, and he had been moved by it, changed by it. Finally, the day came when Martin arrived with news. The prosecutor had agreed to a plea bargain. Wade would plead guilty to a lesser charge, manslaughter instead of murder, and in exchange for his cooperation and the overwhelming support from the community, he would receive a reduced sentence. It wasn't a complete exoneration, but it was a victory, a testament to Wade's genuine remorse, to Loretta's unwavering support, and to the power of redemption. He would still have to serve time, but it would be a limited sentence, a chance to pay his debt to society and then return to the life he was building with Loretta. The cost of a second chance was high, but it was a price Wade was willing to pay. He had faced his demons, confronted his past, and emerged from the darkness, scarred but not broken, ready to embrace a future that was finally within his reach. He had Loretta. He had a chance. And that was everything. Chapter 20. The final confrontation of hearts and horizons. The news of the plea bargain brought a wave of relief, but also a sense of impending separation. Wade would have to return to Arizona, to face the court, to serve his sentence. The thought of being apart from Loretta, after all they had been through, was a heavy weight on his heart. They spent their remaining days in Montana savoring every moment, walking hand in hand through the meadows, watching the sunsets paint the mountains in hues of gold and purple, sharing quiet conversations under the vast, starlit sky. They spoke of their dreams, their hopes, their plans for the future, a future that seemed both fragile and promising. The day of Wade's departure arrived too soon. Loretta stood beside him, her hand clasped tightly in his, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and unwavering support. "I'll be waiting for you, Wade," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Every day, every moment, I'll be here." He pulled her close, embracing her tightly, his heart aching with love and gratitude. "I know you will, Loretta," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "And I'll come back to you. I swear it. This isn't goodbye. It's just until we meet again." He kissed her then, a long, passionate kiss that spoke of their enduring love, their unbreakable bond, their shared commitment to a future together. It was a kiss that sealed their promise, a kiss that would sustain them through the months of separation, a kiss that would be a beacon of hope in the darkness. Wade rode away, his silhouette disappearing into the distance, leaving Loretta standing alone, Watching him go, her heart filled with a mixture of grief and unwavering faith. She knew the road ahead would be challenging, that the months of separation would be difficult, but she also knew that their love was strong enough to withstand anything, that their bond was unbreakable. She returned to the Bar X, to the ranch they had fought so hard to reclaim, to the life they were building together. She worked tirelessly, tending to the land, caring for the animals, preparing for Wade's return. She was not just waiting, she was building, creating, solidifying the foundation of their future. Months passed, seasons changed, and Loretta received letters from Wade, letters filled with his love, his longing, his determination to make amends, to be a better man. He wrote about his experiences, his regrets, his hopes for the future, his unwavering commitment to her. And then one day he was there, standing at the edge of her property, just as he had been the day he'd ridden back into her life. He was leaner, harder, his eyes reflecting the experiences he'd endured, but his gaze was filled with the same love, the same unwavering devotion. Loretta ran to him, her heart overflowing with joy, her arms reaching out to embrace him. He caught her in his arms, holding her close, burying his face in her hair, his body trembling with emotion. "I'm home, Loretta," he whispered, his voice choked with feeling. "I'm home." They stood there for a long moment, locked in embrace, the silence broken only by the sound of their breathing, the beating of their hearts. The final confrontation of hearts and horizons had come to a close. The past, with all its shadows and pain, was behind them. The future, with all its promise and possibility, lay before them, stretching out like the vast, open landscape that surrounded them. They had faced their demons, conquered their fears, and earned their second chance. They were together, finally and forever. The sun was setting, and it was glorious.
Epilogue.
The years that followed were a testament to their resilience, their love, and their unwavering commitment to each other. Loretta and Wade built a life together on the Bar X, a life that was both simple and profound, filled with hard work, quiet moments, and a deep, abiding love that had weathered the storms of their past. They expanded the ranch, raising cattle and horses, their herds growing, their prosperity a reflection of their shared dedication and their harmonious partnership. They became respected members of the community, their story a legend whispered throughout the territory, a tale of redemption, forgiveness, and the enduring power of love. They never forgot the struggles they had endured, the challenges they had overcome. The scars of the past remained, a reminder of the pain they had both experienced, but they were also a testament to their strength, their resilience, their ability to heal and to forgive. They often sat on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sunsets paint the sky in vibrant hues, their hands clasped together, their hearts filled with gratitude for the life they had built, for the second chance they had been given. They had children, a son and a daughter, who grew up strong and independent, inheriting their parents' love for the land, their respect for hard work, and their unwavering commitment to family. They taught their children the importance of honesty, integrity, and forgiveness, sharing their own story, a cautionary tale and a testament to the transformative power of love. Wade never completely shed the shadow of his past, the memories of his outlaw days, the guilt he carried for the mistakes he had made. But he found solace in Loretta's love, in her unwavering belief in him, in her ability to see the good in him, the man he had become. Loretta, too, carried the scars of her past, the pain of betrayal, the fear of abandonment. But she found healing in Wade's love, in his unwavering devotion, in his commitment to their life together. They grew old together, their hair turning silver, their bodies slowing, but their love remained as strong and vibrant as it had been on the day they had reunited, the day Wade had ridden back into her life, a changed man, a redeemed man. One evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the sun set for the final time, their hands clasped together, their hearts filled with peace, Loretta looked at Wade, her eyes shining with love. "We made it, Wade," she whispered, her voice soft but clear. "We truly made it." He smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners, his gaze filled with a love that had endured the test of time. "We did, Loretta," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "We did it together." And as the last rays of the sun faded, casting a golden glow over the land they loved, they closed their eyes, their hearts filled with gratitude, their souls intertwined forever, their story a legend that would be whispered on the wind for generations to come, a testament to the enduring power of love, forgiveness, and the unwavering pursuit of a second chance. They had found their peace. They had found their home. Together.